social media is flooded with people telling you how to do leak code, do system design, and pass the interview to get into Google, Facebook. And when I did the numbers, the number of engineers they've all got, it's less than 1% of the people who are working as software engineers. So 99% of us aren't working in big tech. And if you look at social media, there's this impression that everybody works in big tech, everybody builds websites. But there's not. There's a whole world of software outside of web development that almost gets forgotten about in social media. And a lot of it's very interesting. There's some really fun engineering challenges.
Hey everyone, my name is Henry Suryawirawan, and you're listening to the Tech Lead Journal podcast, the show where I'll be bringing you the greatest technical leaders, practitioners, and thought leaders in the industry to discuss about their journey, ideas, and practices that we all can learn and apply to build a highly performing technical team and to make an impact in your personal work. So let's dive into our journal. Hello everyone, welcome back to another new episode of the Tech Lead Journal podcast. Today I have with me John Crickett. So some of you maybe would have known him on LinkedIn, maybe on coding challenges that you've seen over the internet. So John today is going to share some of his learning, some of his coding challenges. And also I believe we can learn a lot from him because he has almost like 30 years coding experience. So welcome John to the show. Looking forward for our conversation.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you for inviting me on the show. And thank you for reminding me that I'm getting grey. Been doing this for nearly 30 years.
All right. So the reason I invite you because some of my listeners actually requested for you to be on the show. So I'm really happy to have you. Maybe John, in the beginning, I'll ask you to share a little bit more about yourself for those of you who probably haven't heard about John. Maybe if you can share any highlights or turning points that we all can learn from.
Sure. I've been a software engineer for about 30 years now. And I guess the highlights for me has been seeing how much the industry has changed since then. I started off at a very traditional engineering company who were focused on things like radio comms and very traditional software engineering. Very, very quickly, within a year or two, got experience of internet service providers and the birth of the internet. That just changed the way we worked. So going from that session where you walked into an office, you grabbed a book, if there was one, and looked up stuff in the manual to, I can now look it up on the internet and have access to almost any information in the world instantly. It's been transformational, and it's been a real exciting part to see how much that's changed the industry, see the growth of the industry, and how much interesting software we get to build since then.
Hey, thank you for being part of the Tech Lead Journal community. This show wouldn't be the same without your ears, and you are the reason this show exists. If you're loving TLJ and want to see it keep on growing, consider becoming a patron at techleadjournal.dev/patron or buying me a coffee at techleadjournal.dev/coffee. Every little bit helps fuel the research, editing, and sleepless nights that go into making this show the best it can be. Thanks for being the best listeners any podcast could ask for. And now, let's get back to our episode. So I think I also experienced back then, right, when the internet was just starting. Previously, it was even quite slow, right? 56 kbps, probably some of you would have experienced that. So it's still kind of like slow. Searching is probably also expensive because you need to pay for those dial-ups. So I can actually see that the way internet has actually transformed the way we work, the way we get information. And now I think it's very easy. Sometimes even you have too many options of resources that you can learn from. Yeah, so in the beginning, John, I think you have almost 30 years of experience. I think throughout the preview of our conversation, you actually shared that you have actually gone through multiple roles in your career, right? So from being an IC, from senior leadership, and even a founder one time. So maybe if you can tell us a little bit more about all these roles and transitions.
Yeah, sure. So I started off, as you say, as an IC, a very traditional engineering company. Brief stint at an internet service provider at the early part of the internet. And then I moved around a couple of engineering companies. And then I moved into, should we say, more tech companies. And the whole .com boom was going on around me. We were hearing about Google, Yahoo, Amazon, GeoCities, and other companies that were big then. And I'd always planned to start my own business when I got to 40, but as a 22-year-old, seeing this .com boom around me, it's like, I should do it now. Why am I waiting? Lots of other people are doing it. Wasn't quite as good an environment in the UK as perhaps it is in the US, but I started my own business then. In my epic failure of imagination, I just started a software consultancy, just like the companies I'd worked at. No big vision, no, I'm going to start the next Google, just how do I become the next software consultancy and sell that? kind of sticking to what I knew from a few years' experience. Did that for several years, accidentally fell into kind of doing a .com. So ended up building a bed and breakfast search engine, kind of like Airbnb, but much simpler back in 2004. But again, didn't have the vision. We only aimed to capture the whole B&B market in the UK. Didn't think about making this worldwide. Didn't have that vision and the ability to execute, or the vision to execute on, shall I say. Did that for several years, then basically through my brother, who's my business partner, getting married and deciding to pursue other ventures. Ended up moving into different areas, got married and started a family myself, so putting 60 hours a week into a business just wasn't viable anymore. So I went back to working for other people, very IC career, did that for a few years, moved into management in employment. Then coming up to 2018, again, I was doing a lot of traveling. I wanted to spend more time with my family, so I went back to contracting, again, back to being an IC, so I could work remotely and see more of my family and support my kids who are home educated. Then pandemic, everyone went remote, so I ended up going back into management roles. Did that for a little bit, but then also circumstances down here, we've had tech layoffs. I got laid off as well. That put me back to contracting, and eventually that's led me back to now starting up my own business, which is what I am now, and doing yet another small scale startup, shall we say.
Wow, I think it's pretty much variety of roles that you have played, right? So I think some people here probably could relate because I believe, although probably not as plenty of roles that they have played in their career like yours, but actually they have transitioned from IC management, maybe some even back to IC, right? I myself have done it twice, IC management, IC management. So I think there's always a challenge. But I think the first question I would like to ask is like some people actually question, should they actually go to management, or maybe for those managers who probably don't really like the management job, should they go back to IC? Maybe you can give a little bit of perspective from your experience. What do you think about all this?
So I think if you've never experienced both and you think you might enjoy becoming a manager, you should try and take the opportunity to do that. And you should try and get that experience, because even if you don't enjoy it, decide it's not for you, it will have given you that insight into what the role involves. It'll give you more empathy with what a manager is trying to achieve, with what they need to do. It'll give you that broader commercial awareness. So when you do go back to being an IC, you're better positioned to use that knowledge to advance your career as an IC. So maybe when you get to senior or staff, depending on your company, and you switch to a management track or you become a manager, that's a lot of potential learning that when you then, if you decide it's not for you and you move back, you can use to go staff and staff plus. And that awareness, the kind of awareness of the bigger impact, the awareness of how to influence people, the awareness how to drive change, the awareness of what the commercial realities are and how you have to network outside of tech are incredibly useful and will help you have more impact and, as I say, progress your career. So I would advise anyone that thinks they might be interested to try it, because if you find it's a career for you, great. If you don't, there are transferable skills you can bring back to being a software engineer.
Some people actually perceive management to be a higher role, hence a bigger pay, although in some companies that may not be true. And some would actually stay in the job simply because of that, even though they are maybe not as passionate as being an IC, right? So what would you tell to those people probably who are kind of like stuck, like they don't want to lose the management position, but they're also not enjoying it?
Well, I think it depends on the market you're in, because here in the UK at least, the best paid roles are normally in contracting. So it's changing a little bit now, but at that point, I would say leave the management role, go out contracting, or again, fortunately, it's changing. Certainly, going back the 30 years when I started, your career was you get to senior software engineer, then you move to manager if you want to progress and you want to get higher pay. There was no dual career track. And that's a mistake, because not everyone's cut out for it. It's a different skill set. But there are increasingly, and I would say about a third of the companies I see in the UK now have this dual career track. So if you're stuck in management role and you're stuck there because it's better benefits, it's better pay, and you feel that it's valuable, but you hate it, start upskilling, do some of the coding challenges, practice your lead code, whatever it takes. Find a company that has that dual career track and look to move as soon as possible. You'll be more productive, you'll get more out of it, you'll be more satisfied. And there's nothing more soul destroying than being stuck in a job you don't like.
Yeah, so I think being stuck definitely is not going to be helpful in the long term, right? So I think for those of you, you can consider, I think there are many roles these days that are even remote, right? So probably getting an IC remote job is possible. You mentioned a couple of times in the early of our conversation that you started maybe some kind of business but didn't have vision. Now you're back being a founder. So, what is the importance of this vision for those of us who would like to also venture maybe into consultancy or maybe some kind of small business like yours?
So I think there's two sides to that. The importance of the vision is if you want to build something like Airbnb, you need to be thinking bigger. You need to be thinking about executing much bigger than I ever did. And I think that also illustrates a point that I've made several times, that ideas are worthless. I thought about and did a B&B solution long before Airbnb was conceived. I didn't have the vision. I didn't have the drive. I didn't have the whatever word you want to use to actually execute that. So ideas aren't worth anything. It's how you execute them that is. And Airbnb have executed way better than I did. So point proven, I think. For a smaller business, I think it helps to have the vision to know what you want, to know what you're trying to achieve. Do you want to build the next Airbnb? And the massive work that takes and the commitment that takes. And do you have a big enough vision? Or, to be honest, for more like myself, I would rather build what many people would call a lifestyle business now. I enjoy working remotely. I enjoy working from home. Yeah, this is my office. My office has guitars in it. And it's very comfortable. I would rather now build a business where I can comfortably make, hopefully, a little bit more than I would make as a salary, but I can make the lifestyle and the choice I want. I can pursue the technology. I can pursue the commercial or leadership areas that interest me. I can pull a guitar off the wall and play when I want. I can walk the dog when I need to. If I want to work 20 hours a day because I'm really enjoying my current project, I can do that. If I'm not inspired and I want to work half an hour a day and pop off and do something else until that inspiration hits me, I've got that flexibility. Whereas if you want to build something that's maybe a mid-tier 10, 20 million company, again, that vision and clear idea of what you want and why you're going there, I think that really helps.
Yeah, I think just what you mentioned, right? Ideas are kind of like worthless or even like worth very little, right? So it's the drive and the execution that actually matters. And also your vision. If you want to aim for bigger things, you have to have a bigger vision for sure and take the drive to actually get there, right? Or even though if you don't reach there, at least you reach some way almost near to that vision. So speaking about
Yeah,
lifestyle
absolutely.
business, I think it's getting trendy these days. And again, internet, social media allows us to actually have this kind of a lifestyle business. I believe some of the listeners here also have that kind of vision and dream. Maybe a little bit of tips from you. How can people get started to aim for this lifestyle business?
I think it's always been about understanding what lifestyle you want first, and then don't get distracted by other people's vision. Don't get distracted by what other people are aiming for. So it's very easy if you look on social media to see people talking about a lifestyle business where they're making 4, 5, 6 million. That's not going to be the reality for most people. They're probably the exception. Figure out for you more what's comfortable. What do you want? Do you want to be chasing that kind of money, which is going to be a lot of work, and to pretend otherwise is a bit naive? Or are you happy making the equivalent of 60,000 a year, because that will cover all your bills and you can spend time with your family, your kids, dog, whatever floats your boat. And then aim for that. Don't get distracted by other people. Just focus on what your goals are. Again, there's, the comparison takes a lot of joy from these things. And if you're going for a lifestyle business, it should be about what motivates you and getting that joy from it.
And I think also one thing very important is to find the niche, right? Like what kind of specialty or professional things that you can help people so that they actually look out for you. And I think lifestyle also means that sometimes you have to understand what things that you want to do, right? It's not like consulting where you take all the opportunities. That in the end probably is not a lifestyle business, but also like having a selling value proposition that you enjoy doing. I think that's also very important. So speaking about the things that you're doing now, right? Aside from your business, I think you're also doing this coding challenges, which I believe is kind of like quite popular for some of those who follow that. So tell us a little bit more. How did you actually come up with this idea of coding challenges?
So it's a bit of a mixture. As I mentioned, I got made redundant a couple of years ago. And I was looking around and thinking, when I've run my own businesses, I've never been made redundant. I've never been let go. I've actually had a more stable role in the businesses I've run than when I've worked with other people. But again, I was having that problem with I didn't have a vision. I didn't have an idea of what to pursue. So I was starting to think about, how do I find an idea? How do I find something that's going to inspire me, to excite me? And the answer has got to be something that I'm interested in. I'm interested in computers, software engineering. I've been doing this for years. But if you've experienced entrepreneurship before, you learn quite quickly that actually it's not just the idea, it's as we said, the execution that matters. And a big chunk of the execution is that distribution. How do you have people, or companies, or organizations, or whoever your customer is going to be, to sell to? How are you going to get your product or your service in their hands? So I thought, actually, I see a lot of people talking about social media, personal brands. I should do that, build up a following, build up a bigger network in software engineers, create the distribution, and then figure out what of all the problems that software engineers have can I solve? What am I interested in solving? So I started doing that. started building my personal brand, started building and posting on LinkedIn regularly and trying to create that. And as part of that, I also talked to a few other people about startups, and I made a comment about MVPs one day. And then I decided actually I was going to illustrate my point about MVPs of how quickly and easily you could validate and test an idea. And one of those ideas is software engineers want to level up. They need something to do that. They're always looking for projects. Could I create something in that area? And ever since I started programming professionally in 1995, I have built real-world projects to learn. I don't like picking up a bug and just implementing a function. I wanted to build some actual software. And I have done that. And I've got a collection of these projects that I've done over the years, some of which I no longer do, some of which I do repeatedly. And I thought, fine, I'll just put together a newsletter. I'll share one of these each week. I'll share the projects I've got. I'll share new ones. And I'll see if I can build an audience of 1,000 people by Christmas 2023. If I can build an audience of that, maybe there's something that I'll find as the right business idea for me. So I announced the newsletter, bought a domain name, and I was surprised to get 1,500 people subscribe in the first weekend. So at that point I thought, there's something here, so I'll keep building this. And I've definitely got to pursue this. This will lead somehow to the business idea of what I'm going to pursue, and eventually it has. I've been selling a few courses off the back of coding challenges that help people do some of the more technical challenges.
I think that's very interesting idea in the first place, right? You came up with the idea, you want to build a distribution, right? So you execute that by creating MVP, the newsletter, and now I think it's been more than a year, I believe, right, for you to run this.
Yeah, March 11th, 2023 started.
So it's
a year
kind of
and a
like
couple of months.
popular on the LinkedIn. I can see that. So maybe I'm actually interested when you say you love building real world projects, right? Or real world application. And in fact, in coding challenges, you will see challenges, something like building a password manager, building like Redis, building like even Docker and things like that. So tell us a little bit more why we should learn from building real world projects rather than maybe some people love to do algorithm based project.
So algorithm-based projects are great if you want to go and learn that algorithm, learn that data structure, understand how to implement it, maybe test out and understand the time and space complexity so you get that basic knowledge. But very few of us actually write an implementation of a linked list or reverse a linked list in a real world job. It's not what we do. And if you do want to do it, it's built into the standard library of your programming language. The normal challenges we face is how do we build something bigger? How do we actually build a full application? How do we capture requirements? How do we understand a network protocol? How do we implement a network protocol? How are we going to store data? What logging do we need? How are we going to make the system observable? And all these things you're only going to do if you're actually building something real, not a toy application, not a little toy function. So, like I say, if you want to practice building a network protocol and a server and exploring async versus multi-threading for a high-performance server, you actually need to build a high-performance server. You need to implement the network code. You need to build a protocol handler. So I would choose to do that and actually build those applications and experience it. And if you take it far enough, you then implement things like CI/CD. Maybe if you're doing the Dropbox clone, you might implement some infrastructure as code. You might actually go as far as actually deploying it. And when you do that, when you build a real application, you face the challenges that you will in the job. You come across issues like, oh, this dependency is complex, or this dependency's documentation is out of date. How do I use this? And you have to start solving the problems you will in the job, which when you're writing a 10-line solution for elite code, you're not facing those same challenges. So that's where my focus is. I like to build the skills to do the work, to building real-world software.
I think one of the challenges definitely in building real world application is about the experience, right? So sometimes if you want to learn about algorithm, there are so many books or maybe resources that you can look up into as a reference. But let's say, for example, building a Docker container, right? Sometimes it's really hard to actually figure out in the beginning where to start. Maybe if you can give tips for people who always face this challenge, I want to build real world application, but actually I don't know where to start or I don't know how should I start. So maybe a little bit of tips.
Well, that's going to sound like an advertisement, I'm afraid, because the obvious tips are go to CodingChallenges.fyi. And I've done that work for you. I have 60 odd projects there where I've explained what you're going to build, and I've explained, for the Docker one, here are the man pages, here are how you can look at things like sysgroups and trugroup and cgroup and chroot. The projects that I put together don't tell you how to do it. They tell you these are the kind of things you need to know. So without that, the way I approach it is I go and read about the technology, I look for the documentation, I read the documentation, and I apply some of the experience I've got over the years of, say, building a network server to like, this is going to need a protocol handler, this is going to need something that's going to handle concurrent clients. Oh, there's something interesting here, like this one is For performance reasons, they've built this with a zero allocation parser. Go and read about that and learn about that. That's quite interesting. Or Redis, for example, is one of the few things I've come across that's using skip lists. So if you want to learn about data structures, that's a different data structure you don't find in most books. It's something interesting you can learn about, so I can point you towards that. And also you get a chance to apply tools and techniques like TDD. So again, one of my approaches to that is to think about, well, what functionality is this going to do? How can I build a little test? And perhaps when doing the startup sort of things, I've always thought of how can I break things down into, I think what the book Pragmatic Programming described as a walking skeleton. So what's the smallest vertical slice of functionality I can pull out and identify? So for a server, that might be I can connect and do a ping. In fact, that's pretty much what it is for Redis. I can receive a TCP/IP connection, get the ping message, parse it, and respond correctly with Pong. And that's your fairly simple walking skeleton. And then it's just layering stuff on top of that, figuring out what the next little incremental step is.
So I believe those of you will be actually interested to figure out how coding challenges can help you to actually level up, right, by building real world applications. And I believe these kind of resources are still not a lot over the internet even. Like what I can see, for example, ByteGo sometimes also covers this kind of resource, but not many books or maybe resources that people can refer. So I think do check out Coding Challenges. One definite aspect, I think you mentioned this as well last time, right, is that there are so many aspects that are probably required not in building real applications, right? It's not just the coding, but it's like the observability, the CI/CD, the testing part, the system design, probably the quality attributes that needs to be built in terms of the architecture and design. So maybe any kind of tips how we can also level up on these kind of aspects, right? Not just on the functional aspect.
So I think it's all about learn by doing. So again, when I write the challenges, I quite often leave little bits out. So I'll say, you need to implement this protocol. Or say the tar challenge I took. I mean, tar is a relatively simple tool. But to implement it, I've basically pointed you out, here's the spec that you can find on Wikipedia. Go and read the file format and understand it. Here are some of the tools you can use to actually go and explore a binary file, to be able to see what's in it, explore that data, and start understanding it. And even if you didn't do the challenge and like the code, you'd go and look at a binary file and say, oh, it's got a header. The header has these bytes. Well, that's how we structure stuff. If you do a couple of these things, you might recognize that actually some of these file formats have commonality with protocols over the wire. So that learning by doing, that being curious and digging into it. And again, if you aren't building something real and having to go through all these steps, you're not getting that experience that you will in a job of somebody's going to give me vague requirements. We all know how important it is to give good requirements, but the reality is you don't get them. You will have to get your requirements and you'll have to read them and go, but what about this? What about this edge case? Have we thought about this? And a common objection to TDD is we can't do TDD because we don't have good requirements. Well, whether you like TDD or not, you very rarely get good requirements. Part of the job is learning to go, these things are missing. How do I get them? How do I get them for myself? By either asking somebody, how do I work them out? How do I go and find the documentation or the protocol that, if you get asked to say something that's going to do DNS, you will need to better go and be self-motivated and curious enough to go and find the RFC that defines DNS and figure it out. You're not going to get a product owner that's going to come and tell you what the DNS protocol is. You will have to find the skills to figure that out. So again, this learn by doing, this go and experiment, be curious, and go and take steps that you will have to do in the job.
I think you mentioned something really important for any software engineers, right? Is that the importance of requirement and breaking it down actually to the smallest thing that you can do, right? If you're stuck, do some kind of research, ask the people, right? And clarify the requirements before you actually proceed. I think that's a very, very important skill set. And like what you mentioned, right? In my experience as well in my career, I've never seen any requirements that is complete and kind of like everything is perfect. You just follow and then you get everything done. So I think it's very rare to see that kind of thing. So learning by doing is definitely very important. How much time people should spend doing outside of their job or their role to actually level up. I think that's also another thing that some people they want to do it, but they couldn't find the time. So maybe a little bit of tips from you.
Sure. I mean, we all struggle for time, don't we? And that's a choice we've all got to make and how we do it. For me, it's quite easy nowadays. This exploration is my passion. It's grounding in my business. In the past, I've approached it by looking at where there is dead time in my day. So I've commuted to London a number of times on the train, which is generally a pretty horrific 2-hour journey each way. But that gives me 4 hours. Sit with a laptop, sit with a book and learn something new. At other times, I've had jobs where scheduling is inefficient, people often late for meetings. I haven't been opposed to carrying a book or carrying my laptop around with some learning on it. If I get to a meeting room, time for a meeting and no one else is there, sit and lead and go through a blog post, go through some documentation, make use of that time. And I just look for ways of fitting it in throughout my day. I've worked at a company, we're going about 15, 16 years now, where quite often it took 10 minutes to do a build and a test. That 10 minutes, you couldn't do anything else. So I went through a bunch of Herb Sutter's articles on Dr. Dobbs at the time. Every time I did a build, click the build off, read an article. So it's looking for little bits of time you can find in your day that you can make use of things. More recently, I was working at the UK Met Office, quite a nice campus, and over lunch, I'd stick a podcast on and walk laps of the campus. I was getting a bit of exercise, getting some fresh air, and listening to a podcast. Same when again, it's an hour and a half drive from there back to where I live, stick a podcast on in the car. So there are little times when most of us can find time during the day if we want. Just looking at how do you use that? How do you fit things in? How can you call that back? And if you look, there's quite a lot of bits of wasted time during your day now. They won't be as efficient if you get that 5 minutes at the end of a meeting or before a meeting when you're waiting for anyone else. And you'll get interrupted just maybe as you get into the juicy bit of the blog. So it's not as efficient as if you sat down and had an hour focused time to do it. But if you're really struggling for time, it gets you something, it gets you moving. And then I've always been quite lucky to work with teams where we've had an emphasis on CPD, or when I've been a manager, I've done that. So we've normally set aside 1 or 2 hours a week to be able to do that, quite often with a team member doing a presentation or bringing along a YouTube video that they thought was interesting on a conference talks or a podcast, sticking it on for half an hour as a team, watching it, and then discussing it.
That is really practical tips, right? For those of us who always struggle to find time. Or some of us actually think if you want to learn something deep, we have to spend, I don't know, like how many hours uninterrupted before we can actually learn something. But actually, that is not true. Just like what John mentioned here, find a little bit of time here and there, right? Maybe during your commute, maybe during your break, or maybe even before the meeting starts. And actually quite classic, right? When the build actually is running, because I believe 10 minutes is quite fast for you, actually. So many people run maybe like 30 minutes to 1 hour kind of a build. So don't waste the time there. Actually, you can learn something while waiting. So another thing that I'm really interested in, right? You actually mentioned before this conversation that you find many engineers aspire to work in big tech companies. But actually, in reality, so many engineers, you mentioned like 99% of engineers probably wouldn't have a chance to actually work in big tech company. And hence, we should actually focus on leveling up, working in a kind of like non-big tech company. So tell us a little bit more about this reality, right? Because many people still aspire to work in a big tech giants, but yet not many opportunities are available, right? So tell us a little bit more about your perspective here.
So I did the numbers on that about 6 or 7 months ago, because social media is flooded with people telling you how to do leak code, do system design, and pass the interview to get into Google, Facebook, or big tech company of choice. And when I did the numbers, the number of engineers they've all got, it's less than 1% of the people who are working as software engineers. So 99% of us aren't working in big tech. Now, some of us probably never will. Until fairly recently, most big tech in the UK, what there was of it, was based in London. I spent most of my career trying not to work in London. So whether or not big tech wanted me, I didn't want to work in London in their offices. I didn't want that commute. I wasn't prepared to move there. I may never have got accepted. I don't know. I've not pursued it. But outside of London, if you don't live in London in the UK and you're not able, you don't want to move there, there's been very few opportunities. There's a few more now that you can work remotely, and now that things have evolved. But there's probably a lot of smarter people than me that are better suited to fit those roles and, again, want that kind of lifestyle. But for most of us, it's not going to be. And there's, again, if you look at social media, there's this impression that everybody works in big tech, everybody builds websites, everybody does data engineering the way that Airbnb do. But there's not. There's a massive world out there. There are people who are building software that fits in the microphone that we're using today, or in the webcam that we're using today, in the audio interface that's in front of me. There are software in guitars these days. There are software in the guitar amplifiers these days. There are software in the lights around me. There's software in your washing machine, your fridge, the medical devices that are in our hospitals, the aircraft, the air traffic control, the ships we have, everything. And people are building all this software, and there's a whole world of software outside of web development that almost gets forgotten about in social media. And a lot of it's very interesting. There's some really fun engineering challenges. If you're trying to build some software that's still fitting on an 8 or 16-bit processor with 16K of RAM, It's a very different experience to building stuff on a web server with 64 gig of RAM and however many Xeon cores or whatever. And there's still people doing that. Then there's still, take your iPhone, for example. There are dozens of small chips in there, all running their own little embedded operating system, all with software that's been written by somebody. And we forget about all of those. And there's a huge world of software development out there.
Yeah, so I think there's a trend of, learning system design, just like what you mentioned, right? And preparing for these big interviews as if like you're interviewing for maybe the FANG, right? The Google, the Facebook, the Amazon and all that. And people focus a lot on that because simply the job is probably attractive, right? You're probably solving bigger problem, you get a better pay and things like that. But in reality, maybe 99% of us actually probably don't have a chance to actually work in such big tech company. And I think even building website and those APIs, right? I think software is eating the world these days. Everyone wants to build software in their company, right? So tell us a little bit more, what kind of skill set actually very important outside of the big tech giants that we should actually also level up?
So I think one key thing there is system design. So be aware there are systems outside of these big websites. So for example, my first exposure to system design was actually working on the signaling system for the Singapore Metro. Now, that at the time was a pretty big distributed system. We're talking, if I remember rightly, it was about 64 nodes to that network, a few central servers, and they're running over 96 baud serial originally. So very slow serial connections between all the different stations, between all the signaling systems. And back in 2000, when I worked on that, that was a pretty big distributed system. There's some fairly powerful central servers there. It's a network over serial cables of, I would say, nearly 70 nodes. That was quite big. How do you manage all that? How do you make sure all that's coming through? There are very different challenges. It's a safety critical system. If trains crash into each other, people potentially die. It's a very different level of experience versus your Google search is 100 milliseconds slower. So you click on one less ad. It's a very different level of scale. And, the same, I'm sure, for people doing software in avionics, and aircraft and air traffic control, or people doing software for NASA. NASA's a great example. They've been doing it for years. Far more focus on defensive programming, far more focus on how do we have very, very high quality, because you don't get a second shot. And also, we don't have that issue of scale. Instead, we want hard real-time deadlines. And again, a lot of software engineers nowadays don't really know what real-time means, for example. And for something like NASA, it is hard real-time. If you change the angle of entry of a spaceship coming into an atmosphere, it burns up and gets destroyed, and you've lost hundreds of millions of dollars. And again, maybe people's lives. It's a completely different environment. So the skill sets you get vary hugely, and it depends which area you're going to go into. One thing I like to illustrate there is I've talked a few times about data engineering. Now, I've done a bunch of data engineering over the last 6-7 years. In that, I've hardly written any SQL. You see a lot of talk about data engineering in social media, and it's all about Spark, how do we handle this data, how to go into Snowflake. The data engineering I've done has been with hundreds of terabytes of data, but it's all been binary. It's been binary data for climate models that come off a supercomputer. It's been binary data for audio files that are being processed and used to train machine learning algorithms. So the key skills you want to have is that curiosity, that awareness that there are more things out there, the awareness that everything is not a website, the awareness that some things have very different constraints. Scale can be very, very different. Again, so taking one of the systems I worked on recently, we had 10 users at most, but it was pushing 20, 30 terabytes of data a day through the system. That's quite big scale in one dimension, but minuscule in the number of users. But those number of users could easily push hundreds of millions of requests a day. So yeah, it gives you a very different perspective also. The key skill is to be curious, be interested, be adaptable, be aware there are different technologies out there, different approaches, and be willing to go and look for the different experiences and different approaches that people have got. Because you can't, particularly when you do that kind of engineering, it's less talked about. There aren't necessarily the books about it. There aren't necessarily this is how Google does railway signaling systems, or this is how Google does avionics. You have to hunt down and track down people with expertise and dig into it a bit more and have that curiosity.
Right. I think curiosity is definitely important no matter you're dealing with web or dealing with avionics or maybe any kind of software, right? Be curious. Having the passion to actually want to learn, I think that's also another important stuff, right? Because it's very easy to get stuck and just give up, right? But actually figuring out the community, maybe finding open source project where you can learn from, and even like listening to podcasts, all these resources that are available, right? I think curiosity is definitely very, very important. So speaking about software engineering, one trend that is not going away is actually the involvement of AI, be it building websites or building any kind of systems. So what's your view? What's your take about AI in the software engineering role?
So AI I find quite interesting. I literally got into software because I was interested in AI. I was trying to do AI as a 10-year-old on a BBC Micro, which obviously was doomed to failure. And AI was maybe from too much sci-fi. It was the passion, it was what got me interested in all these years ago. And it was kind of the late 80s when there was a bit of an AI hype cycle anyway. Then we had the AI winter. And right from the late 80s all the way through my career, there's been, in the next 5 years, AI is going to put software engineers out of a job. I think one day it might happen, but I think it's a lot further away than we think. The current LLMs are amazing. You can do some great things with them, but they don't reason. And you can see plenty of examples of this if you genuinely look. They are effectively, statistically picking what's likely to be the next text in response to the text that you've put in. That can be incredibly powerful if you want some evolution or maybe translate the report a little bit, look at what code would be next, something that's been done before. But it's missing that reasoning. So I don't see it being a big threat to software engineers' jobs anytime soon. I do see it as potentially quite an interesting tool and one that we can leverage in many different ways. Probably more for us to say that translating data, how do we take something and present it in a different way, which could be incredibly useful for learning as well as reporting and analysis. Because one of the things I've done a lot when I wanted to learn something new is find multiple different sources, find multiple different blogs or multiple different books, because every author presents things in a different way. And I've maybe found with a subject I might learn 10% from one book, 20% from a different book, 15% from a video, because they all presented things with a different slant, a different viewpoint, use different terminology. Some would use longer, fancier words and I'd have no idea what they're about, and some would talk to me like a 5-year-old. So AI is potentially incredibly useful for us to take these things and say, represent this to me as though I'm a 5-year-old, or present this to me as if I haven't heard of these technologies. I think it could be very useful for learning for that, but I don't see it replacing software engineers anytime soon. And the final reason for all that is what we touched on earlier, is the hard bit is good requirements. You replace a coder with AI, you've still got to tell it what the requirements are. If you can't do that, it's going to give you just as bad software as a coder will. It's going to struggle just like we will.
I think that's a very, very valid point, right? The requirements, right? Something that probably AI wouldn't be able to help us. And as I think also, as long as the software is used by human, as in like they have human interface, right? Probably something also that needs a little bit more creativity, which AI probably wouldn't be able to provide best as of now. And what you mentioned, right? AI currently doesn't have a good reasoning. It's always based on like statistical or sometimes undeterministic, right? That
Yeah.
can probably lead to some bugs if you are not careful. I've been using AI a lot lately as well, so I find it really interesting, although sometimes frustrated as well because what I wanted actually didn't get executed by the AI, so I have to fix that. So I think there's always these kind of challenges here and there, but I think definitely we all agree that AI can be really useful to help us maybe boost our skill set, learning about new things, asking questions from like multiple perspectives. I find it really interesting as well, right? Because so many things now we can just ask AI to actually give us a kickstart, right? You know, like if I want to learn
Yeah.
something, that AI can give us a kickstart and we can move on from there. So how about coding challenges here? Can AI actually help you solve those coding challenges? Or how would you envision, using AI to work on those coding challenges that you have?
So I haven't seen anyone solve them with coding with AI yet. And the few that I've tried and experimented with, the AIs haven't been very good at. They can, without hoping not to get sued by Stack Overflow, but when you've asked them how do you implement this, they've given an answer that looks incredibly like what was on Stack Overflow. So the kind of dumbed down version that doesn't meet all the requirements, and it almost looks like it's regurgitating information from a Stack Overflow answer. And we all know that that's not software engineering. You can't just copy and paste it from Stack Overflow. You need to actually understand the code, be able to reason about it, be able to add the requirements in edge cases. So it's falling short on that side from what I've seen. But Mike Thornton did an excellent piece, must be about 8 or 9 months ago now, where he went through one of the challenges and he used ChatGPT to generate tests and to create test cases for it. And he got a lot of mileage out of that way, and it worked quite well for that. So if you look at Mike Thornton's blog and how he's tackled that on Substack, I think that's quite an interesting lead. And that's a potentially useful area where we can use it for to speed up coding.
Right. I think some people get more creativity by using AI, definitely, with the clever prompt engineering. So I think never underestimate the power of prompt engineering as well. Maybe one day AI will be able to give us a much bigger solution to a bigger problem. So another thing that you are doing at this moment is about personal branding. I can see that you actually encourage software engineers to build personal brand, and you even have a course about it, right? So tell us why everyone should build personal brand these days.
Well, we've seen all the layoffs that have occurred recently. We've seen the job market change from you could stick your resume somewhere and your phone would ring off the hook. And even if you didn't stick your resume somewhere, people would be hassling you on LinkedIn trying to recruit you as a software engineer. We had hyper demand recently. The market's changed. There's been a lot of layoffs. The demand is a lot calmer now. So as people want to differentiate themselves, as people want to stand out, a personal brand is a way to do that. A lot more recruitment these days is coming through your network. Well, it's always come a lot through your network, but a lot more is coming through who your network is and what you're known for. Recruiters are going to look for people. So again, if you've got good AI experience and you're known in AI, I'm sure you've got people knocking down your door at the moment trying to offer you jobs. And again, if you're the chief scientist of OpenAI, if you were to look for another job, you could put a one-line resume up there. Chief scientist for OpenAI. You wouldn't need anything else on your CV to get. That would be enough of a brand for what you create. And again, that's why we see people put ex-Facebook, ex-Google on their CVs, because they're trading off that brand. For the rest of us, the 99% of us that don't work in big tech, that brand has got to be, what are we known for? What is our expertise? What have we done that's unique and different? And for an awful lot of us, we can't talk about we built Google or we scaled AWS or we designed their data centers or we did something. Most of us have been part of 99%. We've maybe built a few CRUD apps. Maybe we've scaled them to something interesting, vaguely. So we need to find different ways of standing out and different ways of differentiating ourselves from everyone else. And that makes it easier then for recruiters to come and get you when they're given this shopping list of, we want somebody who's got some leadership, can lead a team, can mentor people, knows PHP, VB, and C#. Then if you stand out as a personal brand, they might have seen your post, they might recognize your name, they might find you in a search on LinkedIn. Basically, it makes you findable, makes you attractive to somebody. Again, if you're showing that thought leadership, to use that quite horrible term, and you've built a personal brand, maybe if a hiring manager looking for somebody and thinking, oh, I really want somebody that knows about AI, if they've been following your posts, maybe they'll reach out to you. Maybe when you put open to work on your LinkedIn profile, they'll think, oh, hell, I've got to talk to that guy because they're an expert on AI. Alternatively, if you want to build a business and you want to do something in some way, so I want to look at helping people level up as coding challenges. My name's now quite well associated with coding challenges. If people mention real world projects to level up or what can I build, the response generally now from the people on LinkedIn is to mention coding challenges and my name. So for better or for worse, that's kind of my personal brand now, and that's what I'm known for, and that's what people associate with me now. Not quite as monetizable and valuable as being known as the chief scientist of OpenAI, say, but it still means that I'm now set apart and differentiated. And again, if you're a junior developer without experience and you can't stand out from someone, but maybe you can get known for having built some interesting little bit of open source. So I had this conversation actually this morning on LinkedIn. Somebody saying, oh, junior developers can't do anything. They need to have years of training before they can do something useful. Well, Linus built Linux when he was a student at Helsinki Uni. He wasn't even a junior developer. He was still a student. He never actually, as far as I'm aware, became a junior developer because Linux took off before he graduated. And he's just worked building that open source software since. That has become his career. Now, okay, not everyone's going to do something like that, but if you're a junior developer with no experience and you're not known, you don't stand out against a lot of CVs, you've got nothing in your CV, you can't show any impact, you can't show what you've done. If you built an open source project that maybe 10 companies are using and getting value from, you've now built some real software. You've got something published. People are getting value from it. You can talk about some impact. Even though you've never had a job, you've not got any experience, you have got some experience to talk about. And like I say, if you've got 10 people using it that finding it valuable, that's going to put you head and shoulders above 99.9% of the other junior developers that you're competing with. You don't have to be Linus. You can just find that few users that are delighted with your software.
Oh, what a fun fact just now. I wasn't aware as well that Linus actually started building the OS when he was back as a student, right? So I think that's kind of like an inspirational story, right? So many people probably they want to build personal brand, but they don't know actually where to start, or they feel that they don't have unique enough value or maybe skill set to actually offer to build a personal brand. So maybe some tips from you how to get actually started. Like maybe should we actually pick a niche, or should we just randomly post something, or should we do something else? Maybe from your experience, how would you advise people to get started actually?
So the right answer is pick a niche and be curious. So decide this. I mean, take Linus for example. He was interested in operating systems. He wanted to implement something, so he did, and he went deep, deep into that niche. And you can't mention Linux without thinking of him now. So he absolutely owned that niche, and that is the best way. I've epically failed at that because I have many different interests. I'm quite curious, so I've completely failed at a niche because yeah, I love coding challenges. I'm really interested in coding and software. I'm also quite interested in business. I did an MBA. I've run a few businesses. I got fascinated in corporate finance for that, so I've dug deep into that and MBA dissertation in corporate finance. When I started my first business, I was a very typical software engineer. Sales is a dirty word, don't want to do that. And marketing, they're just those annoying people that promise the customers lots of things that we're never going to do. Yeah, fine, good view. Can't really object to it in many ways. But when I started the business, you suddenly realize, actually, I've got to go and sell to somebody, or I'm not eating this month. I need some customers. I need somebody to pay me money. So I have to learn sales and marketing. And I found that actually sales isn't bad. It's just talking to people and being interested in them, being curious. Hey, Henry, what's your problem? What are you struggling with right now? Oh, you need some software to do that. Cool, we can do that for you. I can solve that problem. What's it worth for you to solve it? Oh, it's worth $500. Cool, we can do it for $450. It's a simple sale. Now, somebody's told you what their pain is. They've told you what is worth solving for them. If you can solve it for cost-effective value, you sell. And actually, when you take that, it's a transferable skill as well. If you go back to employment and working for people, if you want, as a staff plus engineer, you want your company to rewrite something in Rust or in Go, you are selling. You're not selling something for money, but you're getting people to invest their time, their belief, and buy into that. So, sales is incredibly valuable, and you get those transferable skills.
Right. So I think definitely learn. Sometimes even like you don't even need to pick a niche in the beginning, right? You can try out different stuff, right? You can talk about something that has some interest, like you have some interest in it. Maybe start from there and you can see whether you love doing that. Sometimes the brand doesn't have to stick forever, right? So it doesn't mean that you're now doing coding challenges and that's going to be the only thing that you're doing for the rest of your life, right? So your brand can also still
No,
change. Yeah. And
yeah, it was like I say, I've done coding challenges. I talk about soft skills. I talk about recruitment. I talk about some of the training I do in different areas. I pursue a lot of my different interests. So niching is a better approach. I'm not very good at it because I'm too curious and follow my curiosity. But that eclectic mixture of curiosity and experience we've all got actually makes us unique. So there is probably no one else in the world, though there are many better software engineers, there's no one else in the world that's had that experience of me of building a railway signalling system, building a CRUD app for McDonald's, working on meteorological data, working on voice biometrics, and now building coding challenges. So I'm unique, and there's some unique lessons from that will help somebody. There might be a junior developer that's had this unique experience of building some software for their university club or something that it's a bit unique and different. So we've all had a unique journey, and even if you are that junior developer with a year's experience, there's a person that's just graduating that hasn't had that experience that can learn from you. And a year behind them is a person that's in their second year at university, and they can learn from the person that's in the third year. And a year behind them is the next person. A year behind them is, go back to 10-year-old coding in his bedroom can learn from a forum from an 11-year-old coding in a bedroom somewhere else. So there's always somebody further behind you that can learn from your journey and benefit from that.
yeah, another tips which you can also follow, just like what you mentioned, right? So think of yourself 2 or 3 years ago, right? What kind of problem did you encounter? And what would you actually expect some kind of resources that are available to help you solve those kind of problems? Maybe you can provide that now to help people who are also struggling with the same kind of challenges. And the other thing, probably as an alternative, is like learning in public can also be a way of building your personal brand, right? So let's say if you take John's coding challenges, for example, building Docker, and you don't know where to start, but actually you are sharing what your learning journey to solve that Docker challenge, it could also be one way to actually build a personal brand, right? And who knows that by building that kind of a niche, by solving the challenges, you actually build a community around you as well. So I think that's also another power of learning in public. So, John, I think it's been a pleasure talking to you and learning from your journey, learning from your experience. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. But before I let you go, I have one last question that I always love to ask my guests to share, which is I call the 3 technical leadership wisdom. So if you can think of it just like advice that you want to give to us listeners here, what would that be?
So I wrote down these 3 because you asked for this before, and I've hammered one home too much, so my apologies for that, but it's be curious, be interested, be curious about the world. That willingness to learn and ask questions will make it a lot easier to lead in every single way. The other thing that I think a lot of leaders miss, and my second point, is be careful. If you are in a leadership and a management role, when you come and ask what seems to you like an innocent question, if you're in a position of authority over someone else, it seems like an order to them. So when you say, can we add this feature to the software? They don't hear, is it possible? They hear, go and do it. So as a leader, be careful what you ask for. Your questions will be turned into or heard as orders and instructions. And the third one I wanted to point out is good leadership is about being a good follower. So no matter where you are in your leadership journey, you will have some minutes above you, somebody you're following. If you're an engineering manager, sure, you might be leading your team, but you've probably got a director or a VP above you. If you're that VP, you've probably got maybe the CTO or somebody above you. CTO, you've got the CEO or the board. If you're the board, you've got shareholders. We can keep following this up. So, leadership is as much about following the people that you should be following and being a good follower and setting a good example that people that are following you.
Very interesting, because I rarely hear about this, be a good follower for leaders, but I think actually that's true as well. So you're always responsible for somebody or something, right? So don't always assume that leadership is like the top position where you can direct people, but you also need to be a good follower. So John, for people who would love to do your coding challenges or learn more from you, is there a place where they can reach out to you online?
Yep, sure. If you search for John Crickett on LinkedIn, you'll find me easily enough. It's a fairly uncommon name. You search on Google, you'll find me easily enough. And Coding Challenges is on CodingChallenges.fyi.
Right. Thank you so much for being here today. So, John, I hope you are able to spread more coding challenges to people so that we all can learn and level up our skill set because of that.
Cool. Thank you, Henry. It's been a pleasure.